Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm going to do Luke 21 with you today, and I'm late a couple days, but I decided even if it takes all summer for us to get through the rest of Luke, we will finish it. So, anyway, last time when we were talking about Jesus' dealings, or he was talking to the Pharisees and Sadducees, but at the end, let me just back up a little bit at the end of 20. And if you hear this funny noise, it's the wind's blowing 100 miles an hour here. So just saying. And if you hear this other funny noise, my dogs are chewing on rawhide, which is quite noisy. So any background info or any background noise, just dismiss it. So anyway, at the end of 20, Jesus says to his disciples and the crowd, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love respectful greetings in the marketplaces and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses for appearance sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation." So speaking of the scribes, the people that would write down the scriptures on the scroll, every little character so carefully. So he's being very critical. Do you want out, Bob? Oh, puppy. Oh, puppy, what's the matter? Do you need out? He needs out. Hold on. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Chuck went out and Kitty came in. So anyway, speaking of the scribes, he's saying that, they love these seats of honor and chief seats in the synagogues and, because they just want to look good to people. Basically, it's not that they are good. They just want to look good. And also, the key verse, which will lead us into the next section, is they devour widows' houses, and for appearance sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation. So, the plight of a widow back then was, I was going to do some reading about it, but I know enough about it to tell you that it was very difficult if a woman lost her husband if she didn't have a son to take care of her. So, she might even be homeless or, just really bad for a widow who didn't have either a husband or a son to care for her. So like Jesus with his mom, he would have been, the eldest son, and he did have siblings. Jesus did have siblings. Mary had other children after she had him. But, so even after losing him, she wasn't without sons. But, and also the Apostle John kind of took her in as his mom. But anyway, he would have been the first person to be responsible for her care after Joseph died. We assume Joseph did die because eventually he's not mentioned in Scripture anymore. So we assume he died. And he wasn't at the cross when Jesus died. Mary was certainly there, but Joseph was not there. Or it's never mentioned, but he was there. So anyway, this is going right into a story that Jesus talks about that's called the widow's gift. Now, I've heard many sermons that have mentioned this story, Bible studies, whatever, many. And they've all approached it in the same manner. Their interpretation of it is that it was wonderful that this widow was giving her last couple of pennies that she had to survive on. But I'm going to approach it from I don't think it was wonderful. So anyway, and I'd always just kind of bought into it the way I heard it. But in the last year or so, I've kind of heard other people talk about it and looked at it in context. And I think it's important to do that. So anyway, Jesus had been teaching in the temple courtyard. Before, I had listened to somebody who said, "Oh, it's when they thought it was Wednesday." Well, my author in the book, hi Kitty, my widow and or my book, my author of this book that I've been studying, he believes it was Tuesday of the week of Holy Week. So, remember this guy. I don't know if some of you may not know, and I don't know if I ever took the time to explain it, but this man, Dr. Frottenbaum, I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. He's a Messianic rabbi, which means he's a Jew who is a Christian also, like a Jewish believer in Jesus Christ. So, just like a rabbi in a synagogue, he's a Jew who believes Jesus is the Messiah, so the Savior. But anyway, and it's great because he understands Greek, I think, and he, studied it or whatever. He's and he, Luke is written in Greek, and he can help us. He's done, like I said, studied the Gospels for 4 years and compiled out this research. This one book is the condensed version. There's actually a 4-volume version, but I'm really think this one has a lot of information if you're ever interested in it. So, in the temple where Jesus had been teaching, and remember they criticized him before. They criticized him for teaching. By what authority do you teach these things? Because they had to have authority, rabbinic authority, if they were teaching with authority in the temple. So, but in the temple, it was in the, it's kind of cool to pull up a map of the temple, or a map of the temple grounds. And there was in the outer court, I guess the women's court they called it, women couldn't go into a lot of the parts of the temple, so into the men's area, but men could go into their area. So, and I don't know if Gentiles could go there too. Was it the same as the Gentiles court? Anyway, I'm not sure. But in the women's court, there were offering collection like things. They were shaped like boxes shaped like trumpets, and that's where people would do their giving for different projects. Like I think they even had writing on them, like 4 different things. Like some of it had to do with things they were doing to the temple, upkeep and all that. I think some of it even was, I wrote some notes here. Some of it, okay, so they were giving to the temple treasury. Part of it was to keep the temple functioning and also to pay the temple workers. And then part of it was to care for the poor and widows, okay? I don't know that they were doing a good job with that, though. So Jesus had just been complaining about these scribes, these leaders who devour widows' houses, the things they do for money. And since Passover week has started, we've also learned about how they took advantage of travelers. They were just milking people for every penny. And these Jewish leaders of the day, they had extravagant homes, sometimes multiple homes. They lived high on the hog off of all of these offerings, okay? Is there any further background information I want to give you before we jump into it? I read some articles. One of them was from BaptistStandard.com, really good one. And there was another article from Jesus Unboxed at WordPress.com. So those might be some websites if you want to read further. What is it, Kitty? Are you going back out? Are you going out? You gotta make up your mind. She wants to go out, but she doesn't want the wind. Don't we all feel that way sometimes, right? Here, let me read this, and this is from that article from Jesus Unboxed at WordPress.com, and I think the article was called, I didn't write it down. Why, Kitty? Do you want me to let you out? Let me try to let her out. Hold on. Okay. Okay. Make up your mind. All right, she's out. Okay, sorry for that interruption again. Okay, so, I read in there that the treasury was in the outer courts in the court of women, and there were 13 chests shaped like trumpets, and that's where they would give their donations. So each chest was for a different purpose, for the temple grounds, the workers, I don't know. But they also were supposed to be caring for the poor. And this giving that we're going to read about, it was very public. So people would give, they could see who was giving and how much they were giving, and it was a way that people could show how great they were, prideful, which Jesus was just complaining about, how the scribes would show off, and that it was all for appearance. The things that they would do was for appearance sake. Okay, I think I'm going to read this section at the beginning of chapter 21 called The Widow's Gift, and we're going to look at it from a little bit different perspective, okay? And like I said, 9 times out of 10, probably 9.9 times out of 10, if you're hearing any teaching or preaching on this, they're going to make it sound like this widow, what she was doing is just wonderful, and this is how you should give, and on and on and on, okay? Let's read it. And he looked up. Okay, so this is right after he had been teaching about the scribes taking care of people. So you know where Jesus is at. He's in that women's court, okay? And they're watching people give. They're like, just observing, okay? And he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw a poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them. For they, out of their surplus, put into the offering, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on." And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, "As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be one stone upon another, which will not be torn down." They questioned him, saying, "Teacher, when therefore will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?" And he said, "See to it that you are not misled. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified. For these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately." Okay, so we covered probably more there than we should, because I want to talk about this widow's gift to begin with. Like I said, most of the time when you hear this, people will teach it like that's how you ought to give. You ought to give the last that you have. And I don't think after, many years of hearing that, I don't think that's what Jesus is getting at. In that article that I just mentioned, okay, there were different Israeli coins, including the shekel, and I can't remember what the others were called, but what she put in was 2 mites, which were like the smallest coin you could get, and it was Jesus being divine, knew that's all she had, okay? And that was the smallest amount you could legally put in, according to the Jews, okay? That's the smallest, that was the minimum required. So she put in the minimum, but it was all she had, okay? And Jesus is saying, for they out of their surplus put into the offering, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on. Okay, so when you hear the teaching on this, they'll be like, well, Jesus is making it and he is making a distinction between the rich leaders putting in a lot of money for show and her putting in her 2 mites. But when you hear teaching on it, it'll be like, oh, this is wonderful. She gave all she had. You should give all you have. I mean, and I've even heard people say, and it's okay to teach on giving. I'm not saying it's not okay to teach on giving, but you'll hear people say like, if you had $1 million, would you give $1 million to God? I mean, they're just, what's stopping you from giving $1 million to God? Okay. And they'll say she gave to God all she had. Well, first of all, she was giving what was legally required. Jesus never mentions her heart here, or he's not really focused on her. It doesn't seem like he's really focused on her motives. So we don't know if her motives were she just wanted to give to God because she wanted to give to God and it was freely out of her heart, or if she was doing it to just follow the legalistic requirements, or if she thought giving this money would save her, because I believe they thought that was part of their salvation. Let me read to you. This is that same article from Jesus Unboxed at WordPress.com. Okay, it says, and I'm reading it, quoting it. This poor widow put in all she had because this is what was required by the religious authorities for her to be considered forgiven by God. She is not generous. She's the victim of an oppressive system. I got to get my phone because there was something else I wanted to read to you that I took a photograph of from a different article. Or maybe it was the same article. I think it was the same article. So, everybody talks as though her heart were just so in tune with what the Lord wanted, and we really don't know that. And maybe her motives were great and that's what she wanted to do, but we don't know that. Jesus isn't focused he is interested in what she's doing, and is comparing it to what the Pharisees were doing. But the whole context of this is that he had been talking about how the leaders, like he said in the last chapter, that the scribes devour widows' houses and for appearance sake offer long prayers. So he's been critical of how they fleece the poor for every dime. And he's been critical more than once since Holy Week started. And that's one of the reasons he chased the money lenders out, or the money changers out of the temple. So when people are teaching, oh, this widow, it's wonderful, she gave everything she had, it may not have been so wonderful, is what we're saying. And I have read a few people who mention that, because if you really think that, you're taking it totally out of context of what Jesus was teaching. Okay, not that there's anything wrong with giving, but if it's required, is it really giving, or is it just paying a bill? I mean, you have to think of the details and the context in which this is being told. So again, let me read from that article. It says, let me set the scene for you. Our gospel lesson takes place after Jesus rides a donkey into Jerusalem. It takes place after he enters the temple and begins overturning the tables of money changers, shouting, "My house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." It also takes place after Jesus tells a not-so-veiled parable about the wicked tenants who are thrown out of the vineyard and replaced by others. So make no mistake about it. The stage is set for a clash of powers. It is a clash between the over-the-top imperial military parades of Rome versus Jesus' humble donkey march. It's a clash between a sacrificial system that favored the wealthy and took advantage of the poor versus God's house being open to all people. It's a clash between an occupying power who relied on fear and intimidation to remain in control versus the reign of Christ. So, I think the point here is that this woman is being victimized. This is what was required of her. It's not what she gave freely. It is what was required of her. And she gave all she had to meet that requirement. Whereas the Pharisees, they could give a lot because they had a lot and it didn't hurt them at all. whereas it did hurt her. She might have ended up homeless. Who knows? And, people who teach, oh, this is wonderful and you should have done that. I don't believe Jesus would have wanted this woman to be homeless or to be without or not to have food. It's, there was a lot of abuse of money in the temple. Let's just say that. So, is there anything else I wanted to mention? Jesus was constantly teaching about the wrongdoing of the religious leaders, and this was part of that. Okay, and at the end there, they're in, like I said, they're in the women's courtyard where the collections are taken. And they're looking at these fantastic stones, some of which weigh tons, and it says the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts. And Jesus says, as for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be one stone upon another, which will not be torn down. So basically, the money that woman is giving to keep this temple going, it's going to be destroyed, and that's part of the judgment for the unpardonable sin for those leaders, and it would be destroyed in 70 AD. So now, if you go to Jerusalem today, you can go to the Western Wall. They call it the Western Wall. We a lot of times call it the Wailing Wall. And I've been there, but only to the women's part. And there are some stones. There's that wall there. But, they're obviously looking at different stones because Jesus said not one stone would be upon another. This is huge temple courtyards areas, huge temple grounds. So the stones that they were looking at, not one would be standing upon another. If you go there, you can even see, this is Herod's temple, but you can see, and the Wailing Wall is from Herod's temple. But they have stones that you can look at that are from Solomon's temple, which are much older. And you can see them there. The ones that I saw were like partially underground, but you could see them. Where they had dug and stuff. And it was pretty fascinating. So, let's see, what do I want to say about the destruction of the temple? Like I said, our author thinks it's Tuesday. The other guy I listened to thought it was Wednesday. Middle of the week, basically, but Jesus would be leaving the temple that day for the last time when he's telling the disciples and the people there that not one stone would be left upon another in that area that they were. And it's not. It was destroyed. That came true. So as they spoke, though, there was some construction going on, and that construction would be done in AD 64 AD. And then the temple would come down 6 years later, 70 AD. So and really, even today, the whole temple grounds, it's in ruins. You've got that Wailing Wall, but keep in mind during this story that the disciples, they don't understand the first and second coming, and they still didn't understand that Jesus would have to die and rise again. So, okay, now he's mentioning here, Luke does a better job at telling things in chronological order. So the destruction of the temple is than the other gospel writers, because you're gonna like, you can read some of this in Matthew, but Luke kind of kicks it back into chronological order. So the first thing that's going to happen, the judgment of the unpardonable sin, is the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Okay, but he's also talking about his second coming, Jesus' second coming. And like he's saying, these things must first take place, and then the end does not follow immediately. So his second coming, it's going to be much later. These things are going to happen first. The temple's going to be destroyed, yada, yada, yada. And then these things are going to come. And I wonder, I've got 25 minutes. I wonder if I should stop there or if I should go on, because the next part is going to be pretty, I don't know. You know, I think the widow's gift, it's okay to stop there. It's just a different perspective. And yeah, it's just a different perspective. I mean, if you take it in context, Jesus was being super, super critical of people who took money from, every cent from the poor, including these leaders who would devour widows' houses. And then he sees the widow come in and give all she had. He's being critical that they required all she had. He's not praising it. He's being critical of it. That's my interpretation. So, and like I said, people act. He never mentions what's on her heart. I'm sure he knows, but he's not mentioning her motive. I mean, but she gave what was required, not what she wanted to give necessarily. Maybe she did want to give it, but she's following, and this would have been part of her salvation. So for people to constantly teach, oh, this is wonderful, you should give like that, I don't think so. I think Jesus is being critical of what he's seeing in this situation. So that was such a major story. I think that we could stop there, and then we'll pick up the rest of chapter 21. And like I said, we're just going to take our time with this. We're going to go one step at a time. So we'll start with, we only did 9 verses. Can you believe it? We'll start with Luke chapter 21, verse 10 next time and see how far we get. So I hope you have a great week. I'll talk to you later.